Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast, also playing on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio show. And those new to this show is the Inspire Health podcast is where inspirational leaders, visionaries, and game changers in the fields of health and wellness, mind-body medicine, spirituality, metaphysics, and more all come together to share their wisdom and their insights with you. And you can listen to this on any of the major podcast platforms, so Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc. You can also check it out on the inspirehealthpodcast.com. That's inspirehealthpodcast.com, as well as UK Health Radio website as well. And from there, you can listen to any of these episodes. So if you are new, check the website, our website at Inspire Health Podcast, and you can check a whole bunch of different series we've done. We just finished launching our 200th episode. And this whole series we've done this last while has been on life, death, and beyond, exploring our greater reality. And our final episode concluded our 200th episode. So that series has now come to a close. And if you guys have not listen to any of it, go back and check it out. I mean, this was a mind-blowing series. I think this is the biggest one we've had so far, and it was 21 guests really rounding this whole concept of life, death, rebirth, karma, what lies beyond the veil, all of this sort of stuff. I mean, we talked to neuroscientists, we talked to theologists, we talked to psychics and mediums, past life regression therapists, we talked to several near-death experiencers just to really get a bigger picture of what actually goes on, and ultimately to try and give everybody a little bit more solace and a bigger picture of what could be possible. So if you are interested in any of that kind of information, then please go back and pick through the different episodes and see which appeals to you. Ultimately, nobody really knows all the answers. We're just talking to lots of different people to try and see what lands and where's the overlap. I'm always curious to see where things overlap. I think there's usually more truth in where we're seeing these overlapping concepts. And the most recent one we did was with the Mohawk elder and friend of ours, Daryl Williams. And I just want to share a comment that came up because I think this is really important to talk about. And it's going to segue into what I want to talk about in this specific episode. So Daryl Williams was on the show with us, and he's the Mohawk elder. And we've had conversations with him a couple different times. I always like getting the Native American and Indigenous perspective on lots of different things. I always find there's just anything backed in so much tradition. I like to hear that perspective. And a lot of people find that Daryl specifically has a way of making things sit a little easier on the heart, especially when we've gone through some really challenging times. But in one of the short clips that we put out, which was called "What Happens When Mother Earth Goes Through Great Changes?" And we took a clip where we were talking to Daryl, and he shared his experience with this and his personal insight around that. And a big part of it from him was, even though we are what appears to be going through, a lot of chaos, and which is very much in people's lives, a lot of chaos and fluctuation that's taking place. And his main message with that was sort of like, we need to let go of fear. We need to accept the way that things need to happen. And that at the end of the day, he says, we are going to be taken care of and we will be guided. And he said specifically, if we live in harmony with Mother Earth. And his emphasis was on being guided. Now, I thought that was a really beautiful clip, but one of the comments that came up was, it says, "Well, that's very fairy dust and imaginary. I need a job. Me and my dog are about to starve and probably lose our shelter. No angels are coming to save us." And I can totally understand where this comment came from, and I get it. And sometimes when we are actually in still this reality in our life and we're having to put food on the table and figure out how we're going to make ends meet, it can be incredibly challenging. And sometimes hearing everything's going to be okay doesn't really land anywhere for us when we're sitting there struggling and basically kind of in fight or flight. And believe me, I get this. I totally get this firsthand. And I've been through this in many different ways. And even currently at this moment, we're still traversing through some things like this too in my own family. I mean, a lot of people might not realize, but early on last year, I actually resigned from being a naturopathic doctor in Ontario. I had gone through a lot of challenges with the censorship that was going on and with the what we were allowed to say, what we weren't allowed to say, all of the rules and regulations that were going on around it. And myself and a few other naturopathic doctors all got together and decided to share other information that was in peer-reviewed studies that was directly on CDC or World Health Organization that just shared different information. Ultimately, the goal was we wanted people to be in a place of being able to make true informed decisions on what they wanted to do, because we didn't feel like all of the information was being shared. So we knew that when we decided to do that, we were kind of putting our heads out on the chopping block. And eventually we did. We got in trouble by our college for talking about things that we weren't allowed to talk about. And at that point, I decided to resign because I wasn't in alignment with the way the regulated profession was anymore. And as much as I still love naturopathic medicine, I wasn't in alignment with the regulated body of it. And rather than going through retraining talks on how I should be speaking about health and COVID and all these different things, I decided that I was done. I was going to do things in a different way. So why I'm saying that is just I still have a family, I've got young kids, and all of a sudden, a practice that I'd built up over 20 years, in the snap of a finger, I was no longer able to see those patients as a naturopathic doctor anymore because I wasn't licensed in that province anymore. So we had to really change things around and make some massive decisions and really go with a lot of faith and trust. And I think we're in times right now where that's kind of the only place we're going to really find some solace. And it brings me back to what Daryl was talking about. So Laura, I think, who had posted that comment, I feel you on that. I really do. And I've been there. I'm in aspects of that from day to day at different times, still trying to figure out what's going to be the next piece. I think the key thing is that I'm not trying to figure it out so much anymore. And I think this is the key point that Daryl was trying to get at. He kept coming back to the idea that we will be guided, and from his words, it was if we live in harmony with Mother Earth. And why I think this is important is because this was a similar message that came through in many of the different guests that we had through this entire series in Life, Death, and Beyond. A lot of the people that had near-death experiences that went across the veil and came back with very much similar insights. Essentially, that we often run our lives based on the logical linear mind, and that there's something far more superior to that. Most of what we are running our lives by is not actually the truth of who we are. It's sort of the false sense of perceptions and identifications, and as R.J. Spina calls it, the ego-mind identity complex. And we weren't designed to take information from that place. It's not necessarily in our highest good. And what all of these other guests have talked about and what Daryl's talking about is, what if we could receive guidance from somewhere else that really was in our highest good? A sense of intuition and sort of direct connection that we are being guided, and that if we can connect to that, can that in itself guide us through treacherous paths in a way that's going to be safe? And this requires a certain level of trust and faith, but it also requires practical action. So in the comment, when it says no angels are going to come and save us, well, I totally get that. And I think this is the thing, is that it's not saying that we just sit back and do nothing and wait for something to save us. That's actually not what it is. It's absolutely not that. The idea is that if we can get ourselves to slow down and connect to that other aspect of who we really are, to that truth. And this came up also in many of the past life regression episodes. We had a couple of episodes where they talked about past life regression and the quantum healing hypnosis technique that Dolores Cannon does, where they're talking with people and literally the true self speaks through them and basically tells them insights and information that they need to know. It's really fascinating. The thing is that a lot of times we are not connecting to that piece of information, so that when we are taking information or guidance, it's not coming from that place. And I think we just keep leading ourselves into more and more problematic places, because we're not ultimately getting from the place that really is looking out for our highest good. So the guidance that he's talking about is that it's there, but if we can connect to it, then we can actually listen to it, and it will be very helpful. And then that might tell you something specific to do. In one of the episodes, we were talking to one of the psychics mediums that we were discussing this sort of concept, and she was talking about getting these insights and inklings to do something, or strong pulls to reach out to somebody or to go here or do this, even though it didn't make any logical, practical sense, but she would do it anyways. And if she did it, she then found that that spontaneously opened up into something magical that she had no idea was even available to her until she followed that. This is the idea of following the breadcrumbs, right? We follow the breadcrumbs, but we need to slow things down and be able to connect to it. Now, a lot of the different conversations talk about different ways to connect to that. You can go and check on the inspirehealthpodcast.com. Just go to the website and scroll down. You'll see a free link to accessing your heart's wisdom. It's a free meditation that helps you get to that place where we start to be able to connect more to the wisdom of the heart, to the intuition that's not so much this logical linear mind. Practices like that are really helpful. So go there and download that and just practice it, and practice getting used to what the different information feels like in your body when you're connecting more to a divine insight as opposed to a logical analyzing mind. The feeling is very different, and we need to practice that so we get more in tune with it. We were just listening to a purification track by someone named Dr. Jacqueline Hobbs, also known as Oracle Girl. And we've been following a lot of her work for the past several years. And I think she's a real godsend to hear. I think she's doing some really amazing work. But her last purification track that she talked about specifically said that we have three biological signals in our bodies, and they are the care signal, critical signal, and emergency signal. And she breaks down what those are like, and that essentially they are a biological process that we all have access to. But the reality is that we've also discarded it for so long that we don't trust it, and we don't even we can't connect to it in the same way anymore. And so part of this is, again, slowing things down, taking the time to connect to it, spend time in nature, basically get out of the digital reality so much and start to try to get back into things that are real. Get your feet on the ground, spend time in nature, actual community within physical community when you can. So, and there's a lot of other pieces too that I'm not able to get into all of that for the course of the length of this episode, but that's really important information. And these are all the same sorts of things that I think Daryl was talking about, that we're going to be guided. And so I know that it's difficult when we're in the heart of it. I totally get it. And I'm not an expert at this right now either. I still struggle with a lot of this stuff, but it is there in the back of my head and in my heart to constantly make the time now to connect more and more and more to those signals and then act on them. What I've definitely found changed over the past probably 5 years is less and less time spent on the analytical mind and more connecting to what I know to be true, what feels right in my heart. I trust what my body signals tell me, and I act on it sooner and faster. And the more that I do that, I really do feel like things do start to, the next step shows up even when you don't know where it's going to be. You make that step, that's that leap of faith, and then it shows up for you. But I think the requirement is also to be able to connect to what is actually true. This is the process. And this series will help people. So go back and listen to some of the different episodes. And I think you will probably find this theme has come up many times, and you might find that one of the specific episodes just lands for you and maybe gives you a specific piece of wisdom or insight that will help you navigate these roads that are difficult. You know, we're in a lot of unknown right now, and I think, to me, the only thing that I really can rely on is that place when I can connect to it. That's the only thing that's really real for me right now, and I really want to honor it. So I hope that helps a little bit in that regard, as far as trying to navigate what we mean by we're going to be guided, because I know that sounds kind of hairy-fairy when we've got to pay our next bill and all of these things. But what it actually brought me to was reading a book a little while ago, and this was recommended to us by one of the guests that we talked to earlier. And she suggested we should read this book because she found this was really beneficial for her. And it was by Edwin Gaines, and it's called The Four Spiritual Laws of Prosperity. And that's it right there, if you can see it on the camera. And I found this really interesting. And again, this is timely. I find I start to read a book and it and it correlates with different pieces of information I'm getting from different places, or what I'm coming to on my own, and it always feels like I'm on the right track when different pieces line up. And so I thought this was really interesting, and I want to share this because this comment is something, this idea that, I've still got, my dog and I are going to starve and probably lose our shelter, and there's no angels coming to save us. Well, when we're getting into that place, I think these types of practices can be really helpful, and they actually help us start to get into more of a productive pathway as opposed to a detrimental sort of like fear and worry and I just don't know, right? And I get that when we get into that place, but we can also then practically do things. It's like RJ Spino often says, God helps those who help themselves. That's an old proverb. So if we want to get out of it, then we need to figure out, I shouldn't say figure out, we need to listen to the signals and then act, right? So it's not about being complacent. It's trying to listen to the signals that come up and then act and put the next piece in and the next piece in. Well, I was drawn to read this book and these four spiritual laws, and I'm going to share with you the four spiritual laws, and I just want to go over them briefly with you and see what you guys think, and maybe if they resonate with you, try them out. I am trying all of them right now, and I'm running through these processes because, why not? Like, you go through this whole last series, and it's like we are basically here to have all of these experiences, and we want to keep learning and growing. And if we are drawn to something, I trust that that is something in that for me at this time. So if you get drawn to something, look into it. It's likely something there. That's where your guardian angels or your guides are going to be tapping you on the shoulder to pay attention to something. Listen to it and move forward with it. So the first spiritual law is tithing. And so those of you that aren't familiar with tithing, tithing is a concept that was, I believe, probably well before, but in the Bible, and it talked about giving 1/10 of what you earn. Now, this is to give to God. Now, you can give it to wherever you want, but I'll give you the idea of what she talks about with this. And for a lot of people, this puts resistance up right away, right? I know for me too. And I remember doing courses with Secrets of the Millionaire Mind and their company Peak Potentials. And they would go through, break your bank accounts up into all these different pieces. So you have, break up when money comes in, put a certain percentage into your tax account, a certain cent into your major expenses account, and then into your give account and to your future fund plan account, and all these different things. I had like 5 or 6 different accounts and putting money into different pieces, trying to operate this way. Well, one of them was giving. And what they suggested, I think it was 5%, I think they were suggesting. So this spiritual lesson is 10% of every dime that comes in. Can you give that back to whatever nourishes you spiritually? And so this would be whatever it is for you. Now, for some people, this would be giving to their church or giving to whatever their spiritual group is or whatever it might be. But it could also be giving it to a person. She gives an example in there where this waitress just lifted her spirits in a certain way, and that just totally reminded her who she really was and nourished her spiritually. She calls this her spiritual food. And so she tithed her. So she took track of how much money she would have coming in at any given time and right away tithe on that. So if she had $100 coming in, then she would know she had $10 that she wanted to tithe to whatever nourished her spiritually. So then she would give $10 to this waitress purely for this purpose. So this could be something to start to think about. And what she says is that what she's found is that as soon as we have resistance around tithing, it always comes back to a fear that we really believe that there's not enough to go around. And this is sort of what I think is actually really beneficial about this concept of tithing. Even if you experimented with it for 3 months, or she says, try it for 6 months and just see what happens, that when you give, you will receive. And what I like about this is that you're giving it to whatever nourishes you spiritually. So for me, what I'm doing now is whenever anything comes in, I will take 10% of that and I will now give that to whoever inspired me, or whether I listen to a podcast that inspired me, whether I have a group that I think is standing up for human rights in a way that really appeals to me, or for freedom of speech or whatever it might be, and I think they're doing a great job, then I will donate to that specific group, or maybe to an author that I read a book and it totally lit me up. Whatever it is, it doesn't make any difference. It's whatever spiritually feeds you. So you just donate to it. Now, what this makes you do is this really puts your faith and trust on the line, and it actually makes it very tangible. So when you don't know, because a lot of us, a lot of people are in a position where, we barely make ends meet. It can be tough times. And so to even think about tithing, giving a percentage of that away when you don't even know where it's going to come from, that's a huge amount of faith and trust to put in this process, or put over to something larger than yourself that you're going to be held. And I will keep you posted on how this process goes, but I've committed to doing this for 6 months, and I want to see what happens when I'm doing that. And right now, it actually feels really, really good when I am just giving to whatever has absolutely nourished me spiritually. It feels like the kind of world I want to be in. I want this to be this sort of reciprocation where when something really fuels me and spiritually, which ultimately I think is at the heart, is probably the most important thing that we can do, is really nourish ourselves spiritually. And I think we need to reevaluate where we spend money. We don't question to spend, $100 on a haircut for a lot of times, or a pedicure, manicure, or something along those lines. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but then we might question the idea of paying that much for something that might fill us up spiritually. So I feel like in a lot of different ways, it's changing what we value and what we want to prioritize in our life. So this has been a really fun experience for me over this past few weeks as I've been practicing this. So if that resonates, give it a try and see how it feels and see what it opens up. I mean, Edwin basically talks about this being a massive opener for us. It's this trust and this faith, I think, puts you into a different field where we open up new possibilities that were not privy to us prior to being in that field of faith and trust. So the next spiritual law is goal setting. And probably a lot of you are familiar with goal setting. And one thing that I like that she talked about this was really owning your desires. And desire is one of those words where sometimes we attribute it almost more with addiction, like a desire, more like an addiction. And on the other end of it, desire can actually be the most powerful motivator, or the most powerful aspect of manifestation that we can encounter. Sort of desire and then intention are sort of like right up there as the most powerful things. So what she says is really own your desires. Don't try to goal set for something that you think is what you're supposed to want, or that you think is a more that you judge it as being, this is more spiritually better, but I don't know if I really want that. It's like she just said, just own what your desires are, be really clear with it and go with it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if that desire shows up and then you realize it was not exactly what you wanted, then the vision gets more fine-tuned and you just keep evaluating. I can honestly tell you what I desired 20 years ago, or what I desired in my 20s, is completely different than what I desire now in my early 50s. Totally different. And a part of this, I think, is the more that we are connecting and doing that other work that we talked about earlier with connecting to the true self, to the truth of who we really are. I really think when that's informing us, our desires naturally start to change for things. But don't judge one desire as being less worthy than another. I think it's really easy in this world right now to create judgment around everything, and self-judgment is huge. So be very clear. In her process, she breaks down several things. And the other thing that I really liked about it was, one of the questions was, once you put down what it is that you would like to create in your life, then she specifically breaks down, what would you need to change about yourself in order for that to happen? This was a really great exercise, just putting down what it was that lit you up, that got you excited, and then making clear relationship to what in me then needs to change, or do I need to step up in myself? What do I need to maybe confront? How would I need to show up differently for that to happen? And so that again puts it right back practical, and then we can break those things down and then move from them and move forward with them. And so a lot of this is really fun to actually go through, and then you can reread your goals and sort of keep them in your mind. I mean, one of the things that we learned in our our series when we talked to Nancy Dennison, who was a near-death experiencer and then came back and had a lot of recollection to what went on during that time. And she wrote a book specifically on manifestation. And the biggest thing she talked about was intention and attention. Those two were the keys to manifesting. So constant attention. Don't let your focus drift off here and there all the time. Keep your focus on what it is that you're wanting to move towards. The third spiritual law is forgiveness. Now, I'm only about halfway through. I am just getting onto the forgiveness chapter. But this, so far, what I've read, I'll tell you my experience with it is forgiveness is incredibly powerful. I remember Dr. David Hawkins, and he was a physician and a spiritual teacher, and eventually really just became a spiritual teacher. But he was brilliant, and I loved his lectures. We would go to Sedona and listen to him often. I've read most of his books and listened to a lot of his tapes, and he specifically talked about forgiveness being in this same calibration range, or the same field of consciousness as unconditional love and healing. And so forgiveness, unconditional love, and healing all sort of took place simultaneously. So if we were able to get to a state of really letting go and entering that state of forgiveness, that's the realm of spontaneous healing that can take place. Because love can cure all, and that field of unconditional love sets the stage up for then healing to take place in the body. And a lot of times you'll see this when you read stories of people that have had spontaneous healing. It's usually tied in with these major shifts in consciousness, and tied in with letting go and forgiving burdens that we've sat with for decades. And so I think this is a really powerful one. Now, when I was going through this, so part of this was, I think, going through and looking to see where you're still holding resentments, where you're still holding grudges, all of these types of things. And myself going through it, my personal experience with this was more like self-forgiveness. Like, I feel like for the most part, there's not a lot of people or situations that I feel like I'm still holding grudges, but I think I can still probably let go of some resentment towards maybe the government and the naturopathic college and probably Trudeau, and some things like that I can still work with a little bit more and find some humor around, I think. And sometimes humor really helps with forgiveness. But a lot of it came back more looking at myself and what did I need to forgive within me, and what were some of these experiences that I still blame myself, or I still judge myself, or I still had a hard time with. And one of the things that Jacqueline Hobbs talked about too, Oracle Girl, in one of the purifications she did at one point, she was talking about what part of us are we afraid to show the world? What part of us do we keep hidden? And that was a really profound one for me. It really had me sit there and just really sit with that to see, like, what part of me am I uncomfortable with bringing to the surface? What is that? And it took a little bit to even just sit with that, to let that stew and rise to the surface. And this is a really, really powerful exercise, I think, for everybody to experiment with. And this is why I'm sharing these. If I've come across things that I found really beneficial for me, I want to share them with you because I really think they will make a difference. So I sat there with that and just sat with, what parts of me do I keep hidden from the world? Because the idea is, how can we really show up as more and more of who we truly are? More and more of who we really are. Less and less self-censoring. Where do we self-censor? Even keeping that in the back of our mind as we are going through our days. Where do we self-censor? Where do we find ourselves not showing up as who we are, or acting in a way that feels out of sync with what we know to be true, because it feels uncomfortable, or because it feels like we might get embarrassed, or we don't want to stand out, whatever it might be. And I'm not judging any of this as good or bad. It's just, this is something to be aware of. This is something I've been personally doing more and more, is checking, where do I self-censor? And some of that has also been, I've needed to step back and just not be around people very much to even really, really find out who I am, and where do I feel honestly about a lot of stuff, minus all of the other pieces of information and indoctrination that we've just had over our years, for good or for bad. So that's a good practice to do is forgiveness, looking at where do we still hold resentments for others? Where do we still need to forgive ourselves? And just sit with that. And one of the exercises that we used to do with Pema Chodron, who was a Buddhist nun, she would talk about this exercise called fear. And fear was an acronym for feel it in your body, embrace the feeling, allow the thoughts to dissolve. And then the last part was to remember the millions of others going through something similar. The idea was that our own suffering can foster compassion or it can cause more suffering. But if we can remember the millions of others, it actually allows us to come together and create more compassion for others because we can see ourselves in others. And so you can do this same exercise with any uncomfortable emotion that surfaces. When we try to sit to look at what part of us do we not want to show the world, it often brings up things of guilt, shame, all of these sorts of things. If we can stay with that loosely, if we can just stay with this sensation and really go in the body, what does the body feel like? Can we just allow this to be there? Can we allow it to just be present without acting on it, without the negative future fantasies or the storyline kicking in? Can we just allow the sensation to be there? Make it very physical. What does the sensation of whatever it is that's coming up, the sensation of this part that I keep hidden, when I allow that to surface, what does it feel like? It might feel like butterflies in the stomach or an icky feeling in the stomach, or chest might feel heavy, or your breathing might change. You might feel tension in your shoulders or a headache or whatever it might be. It's going to be different for everybody. But if you can allow the sensation to just be without stopping it, this is where I think the magic happens. I feel like we burn through this stuff. We literally, the molecules of emotion that are embedded in the body and the subconscious of the body starts to break down, and it can get dissolved, and we can actually be free from some of this stuff. And in the episode we did with Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, she talks about this too, this sort of 90-second rule. If we can do this for 90 seconds, we can absolutely start to burn off this neurochemistry that's often been built up there for decades. So hugely powerful process. And it reminded me, I just read a quote from another guest that's been on our show several times, and a good friend of ours, Giulio Consiglio. He's brilliant, and you should check out his work. He's done some really amazing stuff. And he just put a quote out that says, "It is by letting go that we allow ourselves to come into a new experience. Everything is energy, and when we revoke our vital energy to things that no longer serve us, we allow old, stale, limiting energies to die, allowing for new potentials to come alive." So it's in the releasing of these things that are no longer serving us that we open up to something completely new. And when I think about this from even a health perspective, or from a Chinese medicine perspective, emotions clog up the meridians. They literally will create stagnation in many ways. And then the fluid movement of chi energy or prana through the body cannot function. All of those meridians are related to different organ systems. They're all related to different fascial chains. And this is what usually sets the stage for a lot of imbalance and then illness and disease to start to take place. So when we're able to do this, we not only free up our anxiety and overthinking and all of these sorts of things that we're dealing with, we also clean our body up. Often we open the doors for our natural healing ability to surface again and to take over. And it also opens up any other stagnations going on in our life. So whether that's with our relationships, whether that's with money, whether that's with our kids, whatever it might be, I think we open up these channels to just step more into the fullness of who we actually are. And I think from there, we live a more full, meaningful life. So I thought that was really timely that I just read that quote before I hopped on here to do this chat. And then the last spiritual law is divine purpose. And now I haven't gone into this in detail because I haven't got to this chapter and read it thoroughly through there, but the idea of purpose and life plan particularly came up many times again in this past series. So again, many of the different people we spoke to talked about life plan, and we kind of broke down what that is and how we connect to it, and are we already connected to it? Sometimes it's really hard to actually get off your life plan. There's a lot of different sort of conversation around that, but you can check some of those episodes and learn more about it. To me, I think it comes back to what we almost talked about at the very beginning, this sort of sense of guidance. If we're able to slow things down and connect to those different internal guidance system that are constantly there, giving us an idea of where we should go, or a nudge here, or an inkling to do something else, that's a part of what helps us stay, I think, on our whatever our divine purpose is, or what our life plan is. Sort of like the compass. What is your compass that's directing you, right? And I can honestly tell you personally, if I'm spending more and more time immersed in media or digital or all of that, I find that it's harder to connect to that compass. When I'm sitting in the garden for periods of time, or in the forest or something along those lines, I naturally feel like I'm more connected to it. That's for me, that's my personal experience, something that you guys could explore and decide. But if we really want to connect to that, I also think we start to naturally reprioritize our life, because that comes farther up the totem pole. That's a higher priority that we really want to make a commitment to starting to foster more. So, where do you get lit up? What do you know to be true? If you're following the inspirations, not the passing, fleeting sort of pleasures, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's different than the divine inspiration when you get lit up and everything in your body lights up and you know it's something important. How often does that come up and then something in the head turns around and shuts it back down again? This is always the head is always trying to get you back into your comfort box. But that feeling, that visceral feeling through the body of that divine inspiration, those are really important. And I know from these conversations we've had over the last 21 weeks and talking to all of these different people that that is a big deal. We really want to pay attention to that. And then what we start to do, and we all have the capacity to do this no matter how much we think we don't, we can start to reorganize our life in a way where we start to give more precedence to those sensations, to that divine inspiration, and then following it, right? That's the next step. And then following that to the next step. As Jacqueline Hobbs talks about it, it is our personal instructions that start to come through. The more that we connect to this, we are spontaneously listening to our own natural instructions, our personal instructions that come through us in the way that they inform the body. And the more that we listen to that, that is what is going to ultimately keep us on the best track. So in a world where we are often looking for others to constantly give us an answer, at the heart of it, I think what is going to serve us best is the more that we can look within and find the answer that's already there. We just connect back to it. And we do what's required to start that process. And what works for me may be a little different than what works for you. If you go back through some of these episodes, there's a lot of different suggestions. Almost everybody in some point gives some suggestions on how to connect to this. So find something that really works for you. Because I really feel that we ultimately, what is going to make any big impact in this world is for all of us to really show up more and more of who we are and bring more and more of ourselves into this world, not a pre-constructed idea of what we're supposed to be or how we're supposed to act, but truly who we are and showing up more as that person in the world. That's what's going to make the biggest impact, not only for ourselves and for our communities around us, but ultimately that's what makes big shifts in the world. So I wanted to share that stuff with you. That's just been part of my personal journey over this last while and going through these 4 spiritual laws. Again, that book is called The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity, A Simple Guide to Unlimited Abundance by Edwene Gaines. If any of that appeals to you, check her work out. We're trying to connect with her. I'm hoping that maybe she'll be on this next series that we're going to do, because we are going to be starting up with the next series right away here, and we're getting some phenomenal guests. And this is going to be around the idea of creating New Earth, a collaborative mission. So I want to talk about what is possible, what can we envision for the future, and then what are some of the practical steps that we can take to put that into manifestation, to actually create it. I want to talk about education and different ways of looking at that, and maybe there's a whole nother angle that we need to be bringing for our kids for maybe a different type of world that they're going to be growing up into. I want to look at changes in healthcare. What are some of the amazing technology that can be beneficial in health that's coming up? I remember talking to one amazing researcher that has shown through just the way that they are vortexing water and tying in with sacred geometry can completely clean polluted lakes without using chemicals. I mean, this is all there. This is here now. This is stuff that we want to be able to make possible and bring into people's lives as soon as possible. So the more we have these conversations, the more we normalize it, the more we're going to actually be able to make it real and tangible in our lives. So stay tuned for that series. If you have not signed up yet, go and either download the Accessing Your Heart's Wisdom meditation or sign up for the newsletter, and then you will get information as soon as the next series comes out. And any of the other stuff that we are doing, check out the Inspire Life Multiversity platform, which is under the courses. We are going to be collaborating with more and more guests, creating some amazing courses where we are going to basically make knowledge tangible. It's not enough to just understand in the head. We need to live it and have an experience with it. So go check that stuff out. Let us know if there's any specific courses that you want to have more information around, and we will look to see who can we collaborate with or how can we put that together to create the best service for you guys. So thanks so much for your continued support. Please share, like, subscribe to this channel. All of this helps us tremendously with the algorithms. And yeah, let me know how the 4 spiritual laws of prosperity work out for you, and I will keep you posted on my journey. So much love to all of you, and thanks so much for your support. Bye-bye.